Tonight, Mark Zuckerberg is not here. And unlike most people, his absence changes nothing. Because Mark Zuckerberg doesn't need to be present to be powerful. He doesn't enter rooms. He builds them, quietly. While everyone else argues inside the space, he adjusts the walls. Now pause for a second. Think about how often you hear Mark Zuckerberg speak. Not as a keynote, not as a product demo, just him, thinking. It's rare, and that rarity is not accidental. Mark Zuckerberg does not compete in the attention economy. He operates above it. Attention distracts, infrastructure endures. That difference explains almost everything about him. Now let's talk about personality. People often describe Mark Zuckerberg as awkward, detached, unemotional. But that interpretation misses the point. He is not detached. He is abstracted. He thinks in systems, not expressions. Where most people communicate to connect, Mark Zuckerberg communicates to execute. Connection is a byproduct. Now think about power again. Power is usually visible, loud, charismatic, performative. Mark Zuckerberg's power is invisible. It runs quietly in the background like code. You don't see it working. You only notice when it stops. That kind of power doesn't ask for approval. It assumes necessity. Now consider youth. Mark Zuckerberg became powerful before he became self-aware. That order matters. Most people develop identity before influence. He developed influence before identity stabilized. When power arrives early, it shapes perception permanently. You don't learn to negotiate power. You normalize it. Now let's talk about control. Mark Zuckerberg does not control people. He controls environments. He doesn't persuade. He designs behavior, but buttons, notifications, algorithms, these are not features. They are incentives. And incentives shape habits better than arguments ever could. Mark Zuckerberg understood that. He didn't ask, what will people think? He asked, what will people do? Now think about responsibility. Responsibility is difficult when consequences are delayed. Social platforms don't show damage immediately. They compound it. Slowly, invisibly. Mark Zuckerberg built systems that scale faster than reflection. That gap created tension. Tension between intent and impact. Now here's the late-night irony. People expect remorse to look emotional, apologies to sound human. But Mark Zuckerberg's language is procedural, measured. He speaks like someone debugging a problem, not like someone confessing guilt. That frustrates people, because people want empathy. He offers optimization. Now think about empathy again. Empathy requires proximity. Mark Zuckerberg works at scale. Scale reduces proximity. It replaces faces with metrics. Metrics don't cry. They don't bleed. They just move, up or down. Now consider ambition. Mark Zuckerberg's ambition was never to be liked. It was to build something that couldn't be ignored. That ambition succeeded. Now the cost is visibility without intimacy. Everyone knows his name. Few feel connected to him. Connection isn't his currency. Influence is. Now let's talk about silence. Mark Zuckerberg is silent when others would explain. He waits, because explanation creates vulnerability. Silence preserves leverage. In negotiations, the quiet person often controls the room. Mark Zuckerberg is always quiet. Now think about evolution. He didn't stay the same. He rebranded. Meta, the metaverse, virtual identity. These aren't pivots. They're extensions, attempts to stay ahead of criticism by changing terrain. If the conversation becomes hostile, build a new one. Now consider isolation. Power isolates naturally, but abstract power isolates completely. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't share power in rooms full of people. He shares it with code. Code doesn't argue. It executes. That makes it efficient and dangerous. Now think about masculinity. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't perform it. He doesn't project dominance. He doesn't seek admiration. His masculinity is functional. It exists to sustain output. That makes him hard to read. And unreadable figures often trigger distrust, not because they're evil, but because they don't signal emotion. Now let's talk about trust. Trust is emotional. Platforms are structural. Mark Zuckerberg built structures and assumed trust would follow, but trust doesn't scale automatically. It has to be maintained, and maintenance requires listening. Listening slows systems down. Speed was prioritized instead. Now think about legacy. Legacy requires narrative. Mark Zuckerberg resists narrative. He prefers frameworks, but history doesn't remember frameworks. It remembers stories. That mismatch is his greatest challenge. Now pause here. Is Mark Zuckerberg misunderstood, or is he simply operating on a frequency most people don't use? Because when someone builds the map, they don't experience the journey the same way travelers do. Mark Zuckerberg built the map, and now lives outside the path. Now bring this back to you, because this isn't just about Mark Zuckerberg, it's about a new kind of power. One that doesn't shout, one that doesn't perform. One that quietly rewires behavior while everyone else argues about intentions. Mark Zuckerberg represents the architect, not the influencer. And architects rarely ask permission from the people living inside the building. They assume the design will speak for itself. Sometimes it does, sometimes it collapses. Now here's where we pause. Because Mark Zuckerberg's story is not finished, it's still compiling. And what comes next depends on whether systems can learn to reflect before they scale again. Now let's talk about consequence. Because consequence is the one thing systems don't feel, people do. Mark Zuckerberg built systems that move faster than emotion, faster than regulation, faster than reflection. And when systems move faster than feeling, damage doesn't look dramatic. It looks delayed. Now think about delay. Delayed consequences are dangerous because they disconnect cause from effect. When harm arrives late, responsibility feels abstract. Mark Zuckerberg lives inside abstraction. Metrics, engagement curves, retention graphs. These are not moral tools. They're neutral instruments. But neutrality doesn't remove responsibility, it only postpones it. Now let's talk about loneliness. Power isolates, but abstract power isolates differently. You don't argue with code. You don't negotiate with algorithms. You adjust past parameters and observe outcomes. Mark Zuckerberg's daily reality is not conversation, it's calibration. That kind of environment reduces emotional friction. But emotional friction is how humans learn limits. Without friction, systems optimize endlessly, even when optimization harms. Now think about feedback. Feedback usually arrives through discomfort, criticism, resistance, pushback. Mark Zuckerberg receives feedback through press releases and congressional hearings. Those are not conversations, they're performances. Performances don't change architecture, they change optics. Now consider apology. People wanted Mark Zuckerberg to sound remorseful, human. But remorse is emotional language. He speaks structural language. He talks about safeguards, adjustments, future improvements. That frustrates people because it feels evasive. But from his perspective, emotion doesn't fix systems, design does. Now here's the late-night irony. Both sides are right. Emotion without structure changes nothing. Structure without emotion misses harm. Mark Zuckerberg optimized for structure and underestimated feeling. That imbalance created distrust. Now let's talk about trust. Trust is fragile. It doesn't scale like code. It erodes faster than it builds. Mark Zuckerberg assumed utility would guarantee trust. If people need the platform, they'll forgive its flaws. That assumption worked until it didn't, because people eventually notice when they are being shaped instead of served. Now think about shaping again. Mark Zuckerberg didn't tell people what to believe. He shaped what they saw. Visibility influences belief more than persuasion ever could. That's quiet power, and quiet power is unsettling because it feels invisible. You don't feel controlled, you feel nudged. Nudges accumulate, and accumulation changes behavior. Now let's talk about ethics. Ethics usually follow innovation. They chase it. They don't lead it. Mark Zuckerberg innovated faster than ethics could adapt. That created a vacuum. Vacuum gets filled by unintended consequences. Polarization, misinformation, addiction. Not because he intended them, but because he didn't slow down enough to prevent them. Now consider speed again. Speed feels virtuous in technology. Move fast, break things. But breaking social fabric is not the same as breaking software. Social damage doesn't reboot cleanly. Mark Zuckerberg learned that in real time. Now let's talk about retreat. Retreat can look like avoidance, but sometimes it's recalibration. Mark Zuckerberg retreated from visibility. Less interviews, more distance. Not because he disappeared, but because scrutiny changed the game. He no longer controlled the narrative, so he reduced exposure. That move preserved leverage. Now think about Meta again. Rebranding is not just marketing, it's psychological. Changing the frame changes the argument. If the past feels heavy, build a future. The metaverse was not an escape, it was a reset attempt. A chance to shift focus from consequences to possibility. Now consider ambition. Mark Zuckerberg's ambition never shrank. It evolved from connecting people to building worlds. That evolution reveals something important. He doesn't want to manage society. He wants to design environments. That's a different impulse. Designers think in systems. They don't ask permission from users. They test. Users respond after. Now let's talk about masculinity again. Mark Zuckerberg's masculinity is functional, not performative. He doesn't seek admiration, he seeks efficiency. That makes him difficult to emotionally engage with. People don't fear him, they distrust him, because he doesn't signal vulnerability. Vulnerability builds trust. But vulnerability also weakens negotiating position. Mark Zuckerberg chose strength over softness. That choice came with cost. Now think about legacy again. Legacy is not decided by intention. It's decided by impact. Mark Zuckerberg's impact is undeniable. The question is coherence. Will history see him as a connector or an amplifier, as a builder or a destabilizer? That answer is still compiling. Now consider reflection. Reflection requires slowing down. Slowing down risks relevance. Mark Zuckerberg rarely slows systems, he iterates. Iteration feels safer than reflection. Reflection asks questions with no immediate answers. Now bring this back to you, because this isn't just about Mark Zuckerberg. It's about a new model of power, one that doesn't rule through charisma, but through architecture. One that doesn't persuade minds, but shapes environments where minds operate. Mark Zuckerberg represents the age of invisible influence. Influence that doesn't announce itself. Influence that feels optional until it's not. Now here's the final late-night thought. Mark Zuckerberg didn't become powerful by being understood. He became powerful by being unavoidable. That kind of power doesn't ask whether it should exist. It asks how efficiently it can operate. And efficiency, when detached from reflection, always creates imbalance. The future of Mark Zuckerberg's legacy won't be decided by code alone. It will be decided by whether systems can learn to pause, to listen, to accept that not everything that can be optimized should be. Because at some point, architecture stops being neutral, and builders must decide what kind of world they're actually constructing. That decision is still pending.